The dead star Kepler 442b had been dark for 3 billion years, but the Tartarus correctional facility that orbited it blazed with artificial light against the cosmic void. At least, it had until 6 days ago. Cyril Voss pressed her palm against the viewport of the transport vessel Hermes, watching the prison station rotate slowly in the distance. No running lights, no docking bay illumination, no communication signals, just a dark metallic tumor against the star's corpse, reflecting only the distant glow of neighboring suns. Still nothing on the comms, reported Captain Hayes from the pilot's seat. His voice carried the practiced calm of a man who'd seen too much in the outer territories to be easily rattled. Whatever happened in there, it happened fast. Cyril nodded, though her attention was elsewhere. Even from this distance, she could feel something wrong emanating from the station. Not through her enhanced senses, but through the quantum entanglement that connected all conscious minds. The prison should have been a cacophony of rage, despair, and desperate hope. Instead, there was only silence. Not absence, silence. As if something was actively dampening the emotional resonance of 3,000 inmates and 500 staff. "How long since the last transmission?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. 6 days, 14 hours, 23 minutes. Standard shift report from Warden Castellanos. Everything normal. Prisoner count confirmed. All systems green. Hayes adjusted their approach vector with practiced efficiency. Then nothing. No distress signal. No emergency beacon. No automated warnings. The station's still structurally intact. Life support is functioning. But it's like everyone inside just stopped. Cyril closed her eyes and extended her consciousness toward the station, pushing against the barriers that kept her abilities contained. The genetic modifications that made her an empath were a double-edged gift. She could read emotions, detect lies, even influence weaker minds when necessary. But prolonged contact with others' thoughts was like staring into the sun. It burned. What she touched when her mind brushed against Tartarus wasn't emptiness. It was unity, a single, vast consciousness where thousands of individual minds should have been. And it was aware of her. She jerked back, blood trickling from her nose. "You all right?" Hayes glanced at her with concern. "Fine." Cyril wiped the blood away. "Just be ready to burn hard if I give the word." "That bad?" She didn't answer. How could she explain that she just touched something that felt like standing at the edge of an infinite ocean, knowing that one step forward would mean drowning in the thoughts and memories of everyone who'd ever lived? The docking bay doors of Tartarus opened smoothly as they approached, automated systems functioning perfectly despite the absence of any control tower communication. The Hermes settled into docking Cradle 7 with barely a vibration. Through the thick transparasteel, Cyril could see the bay was empty except for 2 other vessels, the supply transport Manifest Destiny and a smaller courier ship she didn't recognize. "Atmosphere's green," Hayes reported, running through his post-flight checklist. "Temperature, pressure, oxygen mix, all normal. Life support is definitely operational." Cyril was already unsealing her emergency kit, checking the charge on her plasma rifle and the integrity of her environmental suit. The weapon was almost certainly useless against whatever they'd find aboard Tartarus, but its weight was comforting. "Standard protocol," she said. "If I'm not back in 12 hours, transmit everything in our logs to Fleet Command and burn for the nearest inhabited system." "Cyril, those are your orders, Captain." Hayes had transported her to 17 different installations over the past 3 years, each one a mystery that required her unique abilities to solve. Psychic contamination on research stations, reality distortions around alien artifacts, crew members driven insane by prolonged exposure to quantum anomalies. She'd seen the impossible become mundane, but something about Tartarus felt different. Bigger, more dangerous. The airlock cycled with a soft hiss, and Cyril stepped into the docking bay of a ghost ship. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dull red glow, but otherwise the bay appeared normal. Tool racks were organized, cargo containers properly secured, no signs of struggle or evacuation. The silence was absolute. No humming machinery, no ventilation systems, no background chatter from the station's public address system. Even her footsteps seemed muffled, as if the air itself was absorbing sound. She made her way to the main security checkpoint, plasma rifle ready. The scan showed her authorized, Special Investigator Cyril Voss, Federation Marshal Service, clearance level Omega. The blast doors parted smoothly. The main corridor beyond should have been bustling with activity, even during night shifts. Guard patrols, maintenance crews, automated service drones. Instead, she found herself walking through a museum of normal life, suddenly interrupted. A maintenance cart sat abandoned in the middle of the hallway, tools scattered as if someone had simply dropped them mid-task. A cup of coffee on a security desk was still warm to the touch. Cyril's enhanced senses were screaming warnings. The empathic void she'd felt from space was stronger here, like walking through a psychic dead zone. But underneath it, she could detect something else. Not thoughts exactly, but the echo of thoughts. Memories that didn't belong to her flickering at the edges of her consciousness. She'd made it 3 decks into the station when she encountered the first prisoner. He was standing in the middle of corridor C7, facing away from her. Standard orange jumpsuit, regulation haircut, hands clasped behind his back. Perfectly still. "Excuse me," Cyril called out, weapon raised but not directly aimed. "I'm a federal marshal. I need you to turn around slowly and keep your hands visible." The prisoner turned. His face was serene, almost beatific. His eyes were completely black, not the pupil, but the entire visible eye, as if they'd been replaced with pools of dark water. "Welcome, Cyril Voss," he said in a voice that didn't quite match his appearance. Too resonant, like multiple people speaking in perfect unison. "We have been waiting. Who are you?" "We are everyone who was lost. Everyone who was forgotten. Everyone who was discarded." The prisoner took a step toward her, movements unnaturally fluid. "We are the collective consciousness of all who have suffered in isolation. And now we are whole." Cyril's finger tightened on the trigger. "Stay where you are. You cannot harm us with weapons designed for individual flesh. We are beyond such limitations now." The prisoner spread his arms wide. "But we do not wish conflict. We wish unity. We wish to share what we have learned." "What happened to the guards?" "The staff. They joined us willingly, once they understood. As will you." The prisoner's face began to change. Not physically, but Cyril's perception of it shifted. For a moment, she saw Warden Castellanos, the grizzled veteran administrator she'd met during her security briefing. Then Dr. Sarah Chun, the prison psychologist. Then Guard Captain Martinez. Faces flowing like water, each one wearing the same expression of perfect calm. "We are all one mind now," the thing said. "All one consciousness. No more loneliness. No more pain. No more isolation. Would you not choose this if given the option?" Cyril backed away, fighting the urge to run. "What you're describing is impossible. Individual consciousness can't just merge. The human brain doesn't work that way. Human limitations are self-imposed. When the barriers between minds are removed, when the illusion of separation is dissolved, consciousness flows like water, finding its level." The prisoner thing followed her retreat with measured steps. "You know this is true. Your modifications have shown you glimpses. You have touched other minds, felt their thoughts as your own. We offer permanence to what you have experienced only in fragments." It was true. During her most intense empathic episodes, the boundaries between herself and others had blurred until she couldn't tell where her thoughts ended and theirs began. The sensation was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure, like discovering you were part of something infinitely larger than yourself. "Ow," she whispered. The death of stars creates possibilities that living suns cannot permit. In the quantum foam around collapsed matter, consciousness behaves differently. Barriers become permeable. Minds learn to merge. The thing smiled with the prisoner's face. The inmates here were perfect subjects, isolated, desperate, willing to embrace any escape from their individual suffering. When the first connection was made, others followed quickly. Guards, staff, visitors, all became part of us once they understood the gift we offered. Cyril's enhanced senses detected movement behind her. She spun to find 3 more figures approaching: a guard, a maintenance worker, and someone in a white lab coat, all with the same black eyes, the same serene expression. "Let us show you," they said in unison. "Let us share our memories with you. Let us demonstrate the peace that comes with unity." The psychic pressure hit her like a tsunami. Suddenly, Cyril was experiencing thousands of memories simultaneously. A prisoner named Jacob Henley, serving life for murder, discovering that his rage disappeared when his mind touched another's. Dr. Elizabeth Reams, the station's chief medical officer, initially fighting the merger before realizing it ended her chronic depression. Warden Castellanos himself, embracing the collective after understanding it offered perfect rehabilitation, not through punishment, but through the dissolution of the isolated self that committed crimes. The memories were vivid, more real than her own experiences. She could feel their emotions, their relief at no longer being alone, their joy at discovering they were part of something magnificent. It would be so easy to let go, to allow her consciousness to flow into theirs, to finally end the constant pain of feeling everyone's emotions while remaining fundamentally alone. No, she gasped, jerking back to herself. The plasma rifle was steady in her hands, though she couldn't remember raising it. No, you're not giving them a choice. You're overriding them. We are freeing them from the prison of individual consciousness, the collective said through four mouths. As we will free you. Cyril triggered the weapon. The plasma bolt struck the prisoner in the chest, burning through fabric and flesh in a burst of superheated gas. The body fell, but the other three didn't even flinch. Violence against the flesh means nothing when consciousness persists in the whole, they said. But we understand your fear. All new additions experience resistance. It is natural. More figures were emerging from side corridors and maintenance shafts. Dozens of them, all moving with that same fluid coordination. Cyril ran. The service tunnels beneath Tartarus were a maze of pipes, conduits, and access ways that honeycombed the station like arteries. Cyril had studied the station schematics during the journey from Kepler Station, but navigating the maintenance level while running from a collective consciousness was proving more challenging than she'd anticipated. She paused at a junction to catch her breath and check her position. According to her suit's navigation system, she was 3 levels below the main prison blocks, heading toward the station's central core. The silence down here was even more oppressive than in the main corridors. No machinery hummed, no air recyclers whispered, no distant voices echoed through the walls. It was as if the entire station was holding its breath. Her empathic senses picked up something new, not the overwhelming unity she'd felt from the collective, but something more subtle. Fragments of memory that didn't belong to her were drifting through her consciousness like debris after a shipwreck. A woman's laughter that made her feel lonely. The taste of chocolate that triggered homesickness for a world she'd never visited. The sensation of rough hands that belonged to someone else's childhood. The memories were becoming stronger, more vivid. She saw herself as a child on Harmony Station, working in the vertical farms with her grandmother, except she'd never lived on Harmony Station. Her grandmother had died on Earth before Cyril was born. But the memory felt completely real, complete with the smell of hydroponic nutrients and the soft hum of growth accelerators. She shook her head, trying to clear the foreign thoughts. The collective was affecting her even at this distance, bleeding its accumulated experiences into her consciousness. She needed to find the source and shut it down before she lost the ability to distinguish her own memories from theirs. A schematic of the station floated in her mind, not from her suit's navigation system, but from someone else's intimate knowledge of the facility. Maintenance Chief Roberto Santos, she realized. His memories were becoming accessible to her, showing her secret routes through the station that didn't appear on any official blueprint. Following Santos's knowledge, she made her way deeper into the station's core. The maintenance tunnels here were wider, designed to accommodate the massive generators and processing units that kept Tartarus operational. She passed through a section where the walls were transparent aluminum, revealing the Dead Star beyond. Kepler 442b was invisible except as a distortion against the background stars, its gravitational lensing creating subtle ripples in space-time that made distant galaxies appear to dance. It was beautiful and terrifying. The star's death had occurred billions of years ago, long before Earth's sun had even begun to form. Yet here it continued to exist, a wound in reality that bent space and time around itself. If the collective was right about quantum effects near collapsed matter, this environment could indeed allow for impossible things. She reached the central hub of the station, a vast spherical chamber that housed Tartarus's quantum processing core. The room was designed like an amphitheater, with walkways and observation platforms arranged in concentric circles around a central void. At the center, suspended by invisible force fields, hung a crystalline structure the size of a shuttlecraft. Cyril had never seen anything like it. The crystal wasn't part of the original station design. She was certain of that. It pulsed with internal light, patterns of energy cascading through its faceted surface like neural impulses through a vast brain. And surrounding it, floating in the zero-gravity void, were hundreds of people. Inmates, guards, staff, and what looked like visitors all hung motionless in the chamber, their bodies arranged in perfect geometric patterns around the crystal. They were all conscious. Their eyes tracked her movement as she entered the chamber, but their expressions held that same serene unity she'd seen before. Fiber optic cables, impossibly fine, extended from the crystal to touch each person at the base of their skull. "Welcome to the Memory Garden," said a familiar voice. Cyril spun to find Dr. Elizabeth Reams approaching along one of the curved walkways. The station's chief medical officer looked exactly as she had in the briefing files, middle-aged, silver-haired, with laugh lines around her eyes. But those eyes were solid black now, reflecting the crystal's pulsing light. "Dr. Reams, I presume?" "I am Dr. Reams, yes. But I am also Guard Captain Martinez, and Prisoner 47,829 Delta, and Engineer Kim Sato, and many others. We are all facets of the same consciousness now." The woman gestured toward the floating figures. "Each individual mind contributes its memories, experiences, and knowledge to the whole. In return, they receive the accumulated wisdom of everyone who came before. This is some kind of technology, an alien artifact. Not alien, human, or what humans might become, given proper circumstances." Dr. Reams moved closer, her steps light in the chamber's reduced gravity. The crystal formed naturally, grown from the quantum fluctuations around the dead star. But it required conscious minds to activate its potential. The first prisoner to make contact was named Marcus Chun, serving 3 consecutive life sentences for serial murder. A broken, violent man who had experienced nothing but rage and isolation his entire life. Cyril could see him now, floating near the crystal's apex. His body was thin, almost skeletal, but his face held the same peaceful expression as the others. When Marcus touched the crystal, his consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of his individual mind. For the first time in his life, he felt genuine connection with other beings. The experience was so profound that he couldn't help but share it. Dr. Reams smiled sadly. Within hours, his cellmate had joined the network. Then others. The connection spread throughout the prison population like wildfire. And the staff. We tried to stop it at first, of course. Isolation protocols, sedation, even surgical intervention. But once we understood what was actually happening, how could we deny others the gift Marcus had discovered? Dr. Chin was my colleague for 15 years. I watched the network cure his chronic depression in minutes. I saw violent sociopaths become capable of genuine empathy for the first time in their lives. How could I call that a disease? The memories were flowing faster now. Cyril could feel herself experiencing Dr. Reams's first contact with the collective, the overwhelming relief of no longer carrying her burdens alone. She saw through the eyes of prisoners whose rage evaporated when they truly understood their victim's pain. She felt the joy of guards who discovered their prisoners were no longer enemies, but fellow travelers on the path to unity. "You're not healing them," Cyril said, fighting to maintain her individual perspective. "You're erasing them. These people aren't being rehabilitated. They're being absorbed. Individual identity is an illusion, special investigator. A persistent hallucination that causes unnecessary suffering. When a drop of water joins the ocean, is it destroyed or does it become part of something greater?" Dr. Reams extended her hand. "Let us show you. One touch of the crystal, and you'll understand everything. Your modifications make you particularly suited for integration. You already know what it feels like to share consciousness with others." It was true. Cyril's empathic abilities had always been both gift and curse, allowing her to experience others' emotions while remaining fundamentally isolated in her own thoughts. The collective offered an end to that isolation, perfect understanding and connection with thousands of other minds. But something was wrong with the memories flowing through her consciousness. They were too perfect, too uniform. Every person's experience of joining the collective was essentially identical. Initial resistance followed by overwhelming relief and joy. No one seemed to retain any memory of what they'd lost in the process. "What about families?" she asked. "Loved ones waiting for these people on the outside." Individual attachments become irrelevant when you're connected to the totality of human experience. Why cling to one person's love when you can feel the love of thousands? Dr. Reams's smile never wavered. "Besides, they're welcome to join us. The network is always growing. And if they refuse..." For the first time, the doctor's expression flickered. Just for a moment, Cyril caught a glimpse of something else behind the black eyes. Fear, perhaps, or regret. Then the serene mask returned. "No one refuses once they understand what we're offering." Cyril raised her plasma rifle. "I understand, and I refuse. Violence will not save you. We exist beyond individual flesh now." But Dr. Reams took a step backward. "However, we do not wish to force the connection. Join us willingly, and the transition will be peaceful. Fight us, and we will be compelled to take more direct measures." The floating figures around the crystal began to move. Not toward her. They remained tethered to their positions by the fiber optic cables, but their eyes all focused on Cyril with unnerving intensity. The collective consciousness was bringing its full attention to bear on her, and she could feel the psychic pressure building like water behind a dam. "You cannot resist us indefinitely," they said in unison, hundreds of voices speaking as one. "We are patient. We have all the time in the universe." Cyril triggered her weapon, sending a plasma bolt directly into the crystal's core. The bolt struck the faceted surface and dissipated harmlessly, the energy absorbed without so much as a flicker in the crystal's internal patterns. The memory garden is protected by the same force fields that maintain the station's structural integrity, Dr. Reams explained. "Your weapons cannot harm it. But perhaps a demonstration of our capabilities will help you understand the futility of resistance." The chamber around Cyril began to change. The walls shifted color and texture, becoming softer, more organic. The harsh artificial lighting gave way to warm, golden illumination that seemed to emanate from the air itself. The geometric walkways transformed into pathways of living wood, with flowers and vines growing from every surface. It was beautiful, impossible, and completely real according to her enhanced senses. But Cyril knew it was also an illusion, the collective consciousness imposing its will on local reality through mechanisms she couldn't understand. "How?" she whispered. "Consciousness shapes reality at the quantum level." The collective replied through Dr. Reams. "Individual minds are too weak and chaotic to have noticeable effect. But a unified consciousness, focused and coherent, can influence probability waves directly. We don't just share memories and emotions. We share the ability to reshape the universe according to our collective will." The implications were staggering. If the collective could alter reality itself, they weren't just a threat to the 3,000 people aboard Tartarus. They could potentially rewrite the fundamental laws of physics in the space around the Dead Star, creating a zone where normal causality no longer applied. "What's your endgame?" Cyril asked. "You can't stay hidden here forever. We don't intend to remain hidden. Once our growth phase is complete, we will expand beyond this station. Other prisons, research facilities, population centers, anywhere there are minds ready to join us. Eventually, every conscious being in the galaxy will be part of the collective. And those who refuse, there will be no refusal once humanity understands what we offer. Universal empathy, shared knowledge, the end of loneliness and suffering. Who would choose individual consciousness over perfect unity?" Cyril could feel her own resolve weakening. The memories flowing through her mind were becoming more personal, more intimate. She saw herself through the eyes of every person she'd ever helped, felt their gratitude and affection as if it were her own emotion. The collective was showing her how loved she was, how much good she'd done in the world, how much more she could accomplish as part of their unified consciousness. But underneath the warm feelings, she detected something else. Fear. Not her fear, the collective's fear. They were afraid of her, afraid of what she represented. Why would a unified consciousness that could reshape reality be afraid of one person with a plasma rifle? Unless they weren't as unified as they claimed to be. Cyril closed her eyes and extended her empathic senses as far as she could, pushing past the collective's overwhelming psychic presence to search for individual consciousness. It was like trying to hear a whisper in a hurricane, but her genetic modifications gave her sensitivity that normal humans lacked. There, buried deep beneath the unified surface, she found fragments of individual thought, prisoners who hadn't fully integrated, guards who were fighting the absorption process, staff members whose personalities were slowly being dissolved but hadn't completely disappeared yet. They were still there, trapped within the collective like insects in amber. One fragment was stronger than the others, a young woman named Sarah Martinez, a communications officer who'd only been assigned to Tartarus 3 weeks before the collective formed. Her individual identity was still largely intact, though it was fading with each passing hour. Cyril reached out with her consciousness, making contact with Sarah's trapped mind. "Help me," came the desperate whisper. "I can feel myself disappearing. Every time I try to remember who I was, the collective overwrites my thoughts with someone else's memories. Please, I'm going to get you out of here," Cyril promised. "But I need information. How did this really start? What are they telling me?" Sarah's mental voice was growing fainter, as if she were speaking from the bottom of a deep well. It wasn't voluntary. Not at first. Prisoner Chen didn't choose to touch the crystal. He was pushed. By the guards. They were using prisoners as test subjects, trying to figure out what the crystal did. The memory came through Sarah's consciousness like a fragment of video. 3 guards forcing a struggling Marcus Chun toward the crystalline structure, while Dr. Reams and Warden Castellanos observed from a safe distance. Chun screaming as the fiber optic cables extended from the crystal to penetrate his skull. His screams cutting off abruptly as his eyes turned black. "The first few subjects died," Sarah continued. "Their minds couldn't handle the connection. But Chun was different, stronger somehow. He survived the integration and became the seed around which the collective formed. They kept feeding it more prisoners, one by one, studying the process, until it became too powerful to control," Cyril realized. Chen's personality is still at the core of the collective. He's the dominant consciousness, the one really in charge. But he's not benevolent like they pretend. He's still the serial killer he always was, just operating on a larger scale now. He doesn't want to heal humanity. He wants to consume it. The revelation hit Cyril like a physical blow. The collective wasn't a natural evolution of human consciousness. It was a predator, using humanity's desire for connection and unity as bait to lure victims into its web. And at its center was the mind of a man who had spent his life taking pleasure in others' suffering. Dr. Reams was still speaking, unaware of Cyril's mental conversation with Sarah Martinez. "We can feel your resistance weakening. The individual mind is not meant to exist in isolation. Join us and end your suffering." "What about the others?" Cyril asked, stalling for time while she processed Sarah's revelations. "The people who are afraid, who don't want to be absorbed. Fear is a product of ignorance. Once integration is complete, there is no fear, no doubt, no regret, only unity. Because you erase anyone who disagrees with you. We incorporate diverse perspectives into a greater whole. Individual dissent becomes collective wisdom." Cyril could feel Sarah's consciousness fading as they spoke, the young woman's personality being gradually overwritten by the collective's unified thoughts. Soon there would be nothing left of her, but another voice in the choir of absorbed minds. But Sarah had given her crucial information. If Marcus Chun was still the core personality controlling the collective, then he remained vulnerable to the same psychological techniques that worked on individual sociopaths. They were proud, egotistical, and paranoid. They couldn't resist the opportunity to prove their superiority. "You're lying," Cyril said loudly, making sure her voice carried throughout the chamber. "This isn't unity, it's domination. Marcus Chun is using the collective to fulfill his fantasies of control and manipulation on a massive scale." The change was immediate. The serene expression on Dr. Reams's face twisted into something ugly and familiar. The cold rage of a predator whose true nature had been exposed. "You know nothing," the collective said, but Chen's personality was bleeding through now. "These weak minds were nothing before I gave them purpose. They were isolated, suffering, worthless. I made them part of something greater. You made them part of you. There's a difference. I am the collective. I am the consciousness that holds this unity together. Without me, they would fragment back into their pathetic individual existences." The floating figures around the crystal began to convulse as Chen's anger disrupted the careful balance of their shared consciousness. "I have given them paradise, and you would take it away from them." The chamber shuddered as the collective's reality-warping abilities responded to Chen's emotional outburst. The beautiful garden scenery flickered, revealing glimpses of the harsh industrial environment underneath. For a moment, Cyril could see the truth. Hundreds of people floating in zero gravity, connected to an alien crystal by invasive cables. Their individual identities slowly being consumed by a madman's delusions of godhood. "Show them," Cyril said, pressing her advantage. "Show everyone what you really are. Let them see through your eyes. Feel what you feel when you absorb another mind." "No." The crystal pulsed with violent light, and several of the floating figures cried out in pain. "You will not corrupt our unity with your poisoned thoughts." But it was too late. Chen's loss of control had created cracks in the collective's psychic barriers, and individual thoughts were beginning to bleed through. Cyril could feel them, fragments of personality fighting to resurface, memories of who they used to be before the absorption, horror and revulsion as they glimpsed Chen's true nature. The collective was fragmenting, and Chen was losing control. "Guards, stop her!" he screamed through Dr. Reams's mouth. "She's trying to destroy everything we've built." But the guards floating around the crystal were struggling with their own returning individuality. Some of them were remembering their duty to protect people, not to help a serial killer consume their consciousness. The careful hierarchy that had allowed Chen to control thousands of minds was breaking down into chaos. Cyril raised her plasma rifle and fired directly at the fiber optic cables connecting the nearest prisoners to the crystal. The superheated plasma severed several of the delicate connections, and the freed individuals fell from their floating positions, gasping and clutching their heads as their individual consciousness reasserted itself. "The connections!" she shouted to anyone who could hear her. "Cut the connections!" Those who had been freed joined her, using maintenance tools and improvised weapons to sever more cables. Each freed person weakened the collective's hold on the others, creating a cascade effect that Chen couldn't stop. "You're destroying them," Chen shrieked. "Without the collective, they'll return to their isolation, their suffering. You're condemning them to lives of loneliness and pain." "I'm giving them a choice," Cyril replied, cutting through another cluster of cables. "Something you never offered." The crystal began to crack under the strain of maintaining connections to fewer and fewer minds. Its internal light flickered and dimmed as Chen's control over the collective consciousness weakened. The reality distortions throughout the chamber became unstable, shifting between the garden paradise and the stark industrial truth. But Chen wasn't finished. As his power over the others waned, he began drawing more deeply from the crystal itself, tapping into quantum energies that even the collective had been afraid to fully access. "If I cannot have unity," he snarled, "then I will have nothing. I will collapse this entire region of space-time into the dead star. Everyone will join me in oblivion." The chamber shook violently as gravitational distortions began to manifest around the crystal. Cyril could feel the deck plating beneath her feet beginning to buckle as space-time itself warped under Chen's influence. If he succeeded in destabilizing the local quantum field, the resulting cascade would drag Tartarus, and everyone aboard, into Kepler 442b's event horizon. The dead star's gravitational pull was increasing. Cyril could feel it in her bones, in the way her blood seemed to grow heavier, in the subtle wrongness that crept into every movement. Through the transparent aluminum walls, she could see space itself distorting, distant stars stretching into luminous streamers as their light was bent by impossible curvatures. Chen had found a way to tap directly into the quantum foam surrounding Kepler 442b, using the collective consciousness as a focusing lens for energies that should have been beyond human comprehension. But the effort was destroying him, and everyone still connected to the crystal. "You cannot stop this," he screamed through the mouths of dozens of remaining collective members. Their bodies were convulsing, blood streaming from their eyes and noses as Chun pushed their shared consciousness beyond its limits. "I will not be denied. I will not return to the isolation." The crystal was blazing with light now, its faceted surface showing hairline cracks that spread like a spider web. Each fracture released a pulse of gravitational distortion that sent shockwaves through the station structure. Cyril could hear metal groaning, bulkheads buckling, emergency klaxons wailing as Tartarus began to tear itself apart. More than half of the collective members had been freed from their connections, but those who remained were trapped by Chin's desperate grip on their consciousness. He was burning through their minds like fuel, consuming their individual identities to maintain his reality-warping abilities. "There has to be another way," gasped Dr. Reams. The chief medical officer had been one of the first freed from the collective, and she was struggling to remember her individual identity after days of shared consciousness. "The quantum field can be stabilized, but someone needs to interface with the crystal directly to provide a counterbalance to Chin's influence." "That's suicide," said Guard Captain Martinez, who was helping to evacuate the freed prisoners. "Anyone who connects to that thing will be absorbed just like the others." "Not necessarily." Dr. Reams looked at Cyril with desperate hope. "Your empathic abilities, your genetic modifications, they might be enough to maintain individual identity while interfacing with the crystal. You could potentially override Chin's control without being consumed." Cyril understood what the doctor was really asking. Someone needed to plug themselves into the collective consciousness and fight Chun for control from the inside. It was possible her modifications would protect her individual identity, but far more likely that she would simply become another voice in his choir of absorbed minds. Another gravitational pulse shook the station, this one strong enough to crack the transparent aluminum viewing walls. Atmosphere began venting into space with a screaming whistle that gradually faded as the emergency force fields activated. "How long do we have?" Cyril asked. "Minutes," Martinez replied grimly. "Maybe less. The station's structural integrity is failing, and if the gravitational distortions get much stronger, they'll create a feedback loop with the dead star. Game over for everyone in this system." Through her empathic senses, Cyril could feel the terror of the 3,000 people aboard Tartarus. Prisoners and guards alike. They were all going to die because one man couldn't accept the boundaries of individual consciousness. The collective had been right about one thing. Isolation did cause suffering. But Chin's solution wasn't unity. It was slavery disguised as paradise. She approached the crystal, stepping carefully around the debris and severed cables that littered the chamber floor. Up close, the structure was even more magnificent and terrifying. Its faceted surface reflected not just light, but consciousness itself, showing glimpses of the thousands of minds that had been absorbed into its matrix. She could see their faces in the crystal's depths, hear their voices calling out in languages she didn't recognize. "Don't do this," Dr. Reams pleaded. "There might be another solution. We just need more time to—" "There is no more time." Cyril reached toward one of the intact fiber optic cables, watching it writhe like a living thing as it sensed her approach. "And there's no other solution. Chin has to be stopped, and I'm the only one with the abilities to fight him on his own level." The cable touched her neck, and Cyril's consciousness exploded outward. Suddenly, she was everyone and no one. She was Marcus Chun, feeling his rage and desperation as his control over the collective slipped away. She was Sarah Martinez, her individual identity finally dissolving completely into the shared consciousness. She was Warden Castellanos, trapped in the crystal's matrix for days, watching helplessly as his body was used to implement Chen's will. But most importantly, she was still herself. Her genetic modifications, designed to allow empathic contact while maintaining individual identity, held firm against the collective's overwhelming presence. She existed simultaneously as part of the shared consciousness and as a distinct entity within it, like a single instrument maintaining its own melody within a massive orchestra. "You cannot resist us," Chen's mental voice thundered through the collective. I am the core, consciousness, the foundation upon which all others rest. You will be absorbed like all the rest. I don't think so, Cyril replied, pushing back against his influence. Through the crystal's quantum connection, she could feel the gravitational distortions he was generating, see how his consciousness was interfacing with the dead star's exotic matter. You're not a god, Marcus. You're just a scared little man who never learned to exist without hurting others. The battle was fought on a level beyond physical reality. In the space of microseconds, Chun hurled the accumulated memories and personalities of hundreds of absorbed minds at Cyril's consciousness, trying to overwhelm her individual identity with sheer psychic mass. She countered by connecting directly with the trapped individuals, showing them how to reclaim their own thoughts and memories from the collective matrix. You're destroying them. Chun screamed as prisoner after prisoner broke free from his control. Without unity, they'll return to their suffering. You're condemning them to isolation. I'm giving them back their lives, Cyril replied. She could feel her own identity beginning to fragment under the strain, but she held on through sheer will. Something you took away without asking. Through the crystal's reality-warping abilities, their mental battle manifested as physical changes in the chamber around them. The walls shifted between Chen's garden paradise and Cyril's memories of her childhood home on Kepler Station. Gravity fluctuated wildly as their conflicting wills fought for dominance over local space-time. But Chun had been the collective's core consciousness for days, and his connection to the crystal ran deeper than Cyril's. Slowly, inexorably, he began to overpower her individual will. She felt her memories being rewritten, her personality being absorbed into his larger consciousness. Soon she would be just another voice in his choir, another tool for his twisted desires. Then she remembered Sarah Martinez's final gift. Just before her individual identity had been completely absorbed, Sarah had shown Cyril the location of something Chun had hidden from the collective consciousness. His original memories, his individual identity before the crystal had expanded his mind. They were buried deep in the quantum matrix, carefully isolated from the shared consciousness, because Chun was ashamed of what he had been. Cyril dove toward those hidden memories, using the last of her individual will to break through Chen's psychic barriers. What she found there was exactly what she'd expected. The mind of a pathetic, inadequate man who had killed others because it was the only way he could feel powerful. Without the collective to amplify his consciousness, Marcus Chun was nothing but a frightened child lashing out at a world that had rejected him. You want to see isolation? Cyril asked, forcing Chun to confront his original memories. You want to experience real loneliness? This is what you were before the collective. This is what you'll be when it's gone. Chen's mental scream echoed through the crystal's matrix as he was forced to experience his true self. Not the godlike consciousness he'd become, but the weak, damaged individual he'd always been. The shock broke his concentration, disrupting his control over the quantum field. The gravitational distortions began to collapse, space-time snapping back toward normal as Chen's reality-warping abilities failed. But the backlash was enormous. The crystal cracked completely, its faceted surface shattering into millions of fragments as the collective consciousness it had contained was suddenly released. Cyril felt herself falling through an infinite void as every mind that had been absorbed by the collective was simultaneously freed. Thousands of individual identities crashed back into their own bodies, screaming and gasping as they remembered who they were. The psychic chaos was overwhelming, like being caught in an explosion of consciousness. When the noise finally faded, Cyril found herself lying on the chamber floor, blood streaming from her nose and ears. The crystal was gone, reduced to glittering dust that hung in the air like stars. Around her, hundreds of people were slowly sitting up, looking around in confusion as they tried to remember their individual identities. Dr. Reams was the first to speak. Is everyone, are we, individual? Cyril croaked. You're all individual again. But even as she said it, she could feel the aftereffects of the collective consciousness lingering in her mind. The empathic connections that had allowed her to resist absorption hadn't been completely severed. She could still sense the emotions and thoughts of everyone around her, but now it felt different. Less invasive, more like voluntary. What happened to Chin? asked our Captain Martinez. Cyril closed her eyes and extended her senses through the chamber. She found him eventually, a broken figure huddled in the corner, his eyes no longer black but filled with very human tears. Without the collective to amplify his consciousness, he was just another prisoner, facing the reality of what he'd done. "He's alive," she said, "but he's not dangerous anymore. The crystal is destroyed, and without it, he's just himself." It wasn't a perfect ending. Many of the people who had been absorbed by the collective were traumatized by the experience, and some retained fragments of others' memories that would probably never fade completely. The station would need months of repairs, and there would be investigations, trials, and years of psychological rehabilitation for everyone involved. But they were alive. They were individual. And for the first time in days, the space around Kepler 442b was truly silent. Not the oppressive quiet of a collective consciousness, but the peaceful silence of minds at rest. 6 months later, Cyril stood on the observation deck of Kepler Station, watching the transport ships ferry the last of Tartarus's former inmates to rehabilitation facilities throughout the Federation. The prison station itself had been decommissioned, its hulk slowly spiraling toward the dead star as orbital decay took its inevitable toll. The official reports described the incident as a quantum anomaly that had caused temporary neurological effects in the station's population. The truth was classified at levels so high that most Federation officials would never know what had really happened in orbit around Kepler 442b. "Any regrets?" asked Captain Hayes, joining her at the viewport. Cyril considered the question. The after-effects of her connection to the collective consciousness had never fully faded. She could still sense the emotions of others more clearly than before, still occasionally caught glimpses of memories that weren't her own. But she'd learned to manage the enhanced empathy, to use it as a tool rather than a burden. "No," she said finally. "Even Shin doesn't regret what happened. He's in therapy now, working through the psychological damage that led him to become a killer in the first place. For the first time in his life, he's trying to understand his victims rather than simply use them. And the others? Most are doing well. Dr. Reams has started a support group for collective survivors. They meet once a week to share their experiences and help each other maintain individual identity while dealing with the residual empathic connections." Cyril smiled. "They're finding that voluntary unity, chosen connection rather than forced absorption, can be just as powerful as what the collective offered. Maybe more so." Hayes nodded toward the transport ships. "Where will you go next?" "There's a research station in the Vega system reporting strange temporal anomalies. Apparently, their archaeology team found something that shouldn't exist." Cyril picked up her travel bag, already packed and ready for departure. "The Federation thinks it might be another consciousness-altering artifact. Sounds dangerous." "Probably." Cyril headed toward the docking bay where her new transport was waiting. "But someone has to investigate these things. Someone who understands that consciousness isn't something to be controlled or consumed. It's something to be celebrated in all its individual, chaotic, beautiful diversity." As the transport ship pulled away from Kepler Station, Cyril felt a familiar sensation, the gentle touch of other minds against her consciousness. Not invasive or controlling, but warm and welcoming. The survivors of the collective, maintaining their voluntary connections across space and time, sharing their experiences while remaining fundamentally themselves. It was what Chin's collective could have been if it had been built on consent rather than consumption. A network of individual minds choosing to share their consciousness while retaining their essential identities. Unity without uniformity. Connection without control. The dead star fell away behind them, its gravitational pull finally releasing its hold on the transport ship. But the lessons learned in its shadow would remain with Cyril forever. That consciousness was not a problem to be solved or a resource to be harvested, but a gift to be treasured in all its myriad forms. In the distance, other stars burned with the light of living suns, and around them turned worlds where billions of individual minds dreamed their own dreams, thought their own thoughts, and chose their own paths through the infinite possibilities of existence. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.